I'm an educator. I was a teacher. That was my job. That's what I did, and I loved. And my favorite job was teaching kindergarten kids. I'm Sheree Rose. I was born in Los Angeles 82 years ago. It's sort of hard to believe, but it's true. I'm an explorer of society. I want to go off into the unknown realms. That's what I want to do. I call myself the reluctant artist because I never had a plan. I didn't think I'm going to do this, that, and the other. It just sort of happened, which is how I like to live life. I don't like to make too many plans. I like to be open to new experiences. I got married when I was 21 years old, and I lived a pretty normal life for those years. I was married for 11 years. But I felt there was maybe more to life than what I had experienced. It was pretty traditional. I had a very lovely husband. I had 2 children. I was a school teacher. So everything was pretty normal. It was important to me culturally to be a mother. You know, I don't think I really thought about what it really meant, what sacrifices a woman goes through if you decide to be a mother. But I had 2 children. They're only like 15 months apart. And the reason for that is I didn't want to have my whole life spent raising children. I love my children, but again, I didn't have to be a full-time mother to them. And my other job was I was a teacher, and I was teaching other people's children. So I think I have a lot of motherly meaning, loving children, wanting to see them succeed. You know, my students, I certainly felt that way about, and I felt that way about my children. And I don't, is that because I'm a woman, because those are like natural maternal feelings? I don't know. I think part of it is if you're Jewish, and your family, many of my relatives, none that I knew, but the ones who lived in Poland were murdered in the Holocaust, and that was always a pressure to nurture, to take care of people because of that horror, And I didn't experience it personally, but I certainly understood what it meant. So I think I've always had that feeling of wanting to take care, but I knew that I was looking for something more than the normative heterosexual monogamy. And so that was one of the main reasons that I decided to get divorced. I wanted to have more sexual experiences, and I did not want to lie to my husband. I did not want to tell him I'm meeting a girlfriend when I was really meeting a lover. I thought I made a real strong value judgment, and I still have that. I think sex is fine, but don't lie about it. Don't say you're doing something else. That's the shame. That's the part I feel is harmful to your soul. Well, I think what really inspired me once I did get divorced, my brother was gay, and so I didn't know he was gay. He didn't tell people that, but he was living with a man, and he belonged to a gay temple called Beth Chaim Kadashim. It was in Los Angeles, and it was one of the very first openly homosexual Jewish congregations. And it was still a pretty new idea to be openly gay, but it was part of the zeitgeist at the time. And my brother invited me to go to the temple with him, and I started going to the temple. Well, it was a revelation to me. Here were all these adorable young Jewish men in a temple, and they were gay, openly gay, proudly gay, and they would talk about their sexual exploits. I was like, listening with my ears like this. Oh my God, you can have sex without being married. You can have sex without having to have children because of it. You can have sex just for pleasure. But I wanted to learn, So in those days, I would go to bars by myself, and I would meet men in bars, and mostly men. At some point, I did start having some some relationships with women, but mostly at that point I was pretty heterosexual. And I would find one I thought was attractive, and I would go home with him and have sex, and that was it. I never saw any of them more than once, because I don't think I even had an orgasm with any of them. It was the physical act which I wanted to experience, but I was really sort of despairing about finding any kind of sexual satisfaction, you know. I became part of a group of feminist scholars. They were mostly I think, philosophy professors, and it was a feminist group, and I never even knew what feminism was. We would meet after class. There was about 8 or 10 of us, and we discussed the history of feminism, the history of what does it mean to be a woman, and I learned. I was educated by these women, and one of them said to me, "Don't you realize that you're sleeping with the enemy?" And I hadn't really thought about that, but then I realized it was true, because none of the sex I was having was satisfying to me. None of it, you know. So I thought, what am I going to do? You know, I wouldn't say I was attracted to women sexually. I've had many. When I got into the SM world, I had many female slaves. So that's when it really, but that was the opening of my mind and my body to the concept of something other than heterosexual sex. Besides learning about femininity and sexuality for women, I loved poetry. That was my other thing. I just fell in love with poets. I thought, of all the things somebody could be, the least exploitive, the least caring about money would be a poet. You know, that's the most amazing thing you can be if you want to be an artist of some kind. And I really fell in love with poets. I thought they're just the best. I went to a Halloween party, and that's when I met Bob Flanagan. So it was the contrast between my life before and my life after couldn't have been more profound. And Bob told me he was looking for a good 2-year relationship, and I thought, this man is pretty weird. He told me he was a masochist. I wasn't sure what that meant. But my goal at that point in my life was, I was very sexually attracted to him. And I thought, I'm going to live out his fantasies for him and give him a great 2 years. And that's how everything started. Our first date, he brought a whole bunch of pills. We were at dinner. He brought a whole bunch of pills, and I said, I have cystic fibrosis, and this is a lung disease, and I'm probably going to die by the time I'm 30. He was 27 when we met. I was 39. And I thought, well, this guy is pretty weird, but I'm very attracted to him, and I was married for 11 years. I can do anything for 2 years. And I had joint custody of my children, so that I didn't have to have them full time. That was something I thinking back now, I made a mistake. I think I should have given my husband full custody. Having Bob come into my life, telling me he wanted to be my slave, and I said, what does that mean? You know, I wasn't really sure. I never heard of SM before, really. Didn't know much about it. And he said, well, I want to cook for her, clean for her, have her sex whenever she wants to, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'll even want to clean her windows. And I said, bingo, you're in. So actually, it was the fact that he wanted to do all these things for me that had nothing to do with sex. And also, I got to make all the decisions. I can be with Bob, or I can go to grad school and get a PhD. And I thought, I think I'd rather be with Bob. So, and he became my thesis. You couldn't not love Bob. He was funny, he was sweet, he was just unconventional, but he had such a good heart, and he had such a great sense of humor. Many people, I think, were in S&M relationships, but they never talked about it. It was always done in the dark, and people lied about it, and they were afraid to admit it. And I said, no, if I'm going to do it, I want it to be open. I want everybody to know about it. Cynthia Slater, a woman who has since passed, unfortunately, but she had the idea of an S&M club that was open to anybody interested, had a sincere interest in S&M, wasn't for men only, it wasn't for women only, it wasn't for hets only, it was open to anybody. All you had to have was a sincere interest in S&M. And they came down to Los Angeles, about 2 or 3 of them, and there was about 3 or 4 of us. I don't even remember now how we formed that first group, but we met in somebody's apartment, and we said, yes, we're going to have a Society of Janus here in Los Angeles. And that was the genesis of the performing, turning our private sex practices into a performance. You know, I wanted Bob to be the star. I was still a Jewish mother wanting to see my child. And he was so much younger than me, too, so it was like it fit, you know. It wasn't like we were equals in terms of our age or experiences. So we did this performance to the general audience. Now, this was not an SM audience, where Bob came out and he started ranting and raving about babies and about women and just horrible stuff, verbatim from what this guy was actually saying. I came out, I think Bob was already just had shorts on, I think. There's pictures of it somewhere. And I came out dressed like a nice housewife with a basket full of babies. And each baby had a hook. And I pierced Bob's chest and genitals and his whole front of his body with these babies. And as I kept on putting babies into his body, we had a soundtrack of babies crying. And it started out very softly and then got louder and louder until it drowned out Bob completely. That was our first actual SM performance. But it was a political statement. I was the one with the camera. I took pictures of him and all his performances. And I was very happy to be behind the scenes. I was not a performer with Bob. The people in the audience were these gay men who then started something called Club Fuck in Los Angeles, which became just the mecca for SM performances, for music, for dancing, for wildness. And it was didn't have to be gay or straight or anything. As long as you wanted to be into SM, you came to this club. We had these amazing parties, like once a month, and they were, you couldn't do it now. You couldn't do it now, what we were doing back then. It was in the 90s, you know. It was a wild time. And then we started Club Fuck, which was, we didn't start it, but Bob did a performance at a club called Oleo in West Hollywood. And in that performance, he nailed his scrotum to a board, and I had one of my female slaves in a cross, a spread eagle like that, and I cut into her breast, and which I had done before. I something I learned to really enjoy doing was cutting. I loved to see blood, not to kill them, but to see the blood flow. It was, to me, that was like very primal, to feel that they were willing to sacrifice that much and to trust me that much, that give me a scalpel in my hand and they're tied up. That was a great feeling. But I did it for art. I didn't do it because I was going to get an orgasm. I didn't get an orgasm from it, but I did it as art. And I still to this day, like with Martin O'Brien, who I've been working with for all these years, I torture him mercilessly in performance, but for art. If you're with a masochist, they're very special people. I have a very soft spot in my heart for masochists. They enjoy the pain. It doesn't feel to them like suffering. I mean, it is suffering, but it's not. It's not like beating somebody else in a fight or something like that. It's not that. Each lash, each cut, each whatever you're doing, they love it. They turn that pain into pleasure. And it wasn't just the suffering. They had to be also submissive to me. And I ended up having many female slaves. I loved voluptuous women. I loved their curves and how they responded, and their breasts and their vaginas. One of the things I became very adept at was fisting women. And I was good at it, you know. Also, I was good at spanking men. I would have men line up, and I would spank like 10 of them going down. I mean, it was very performative. Like 10 men lined up, and all I could see was their asses, and I would spank all of them. And I think it was a sense of agency, that I'm doing something that's causing this reaction, and these people want this. I'm not a sadist that wants to torture people who don't want to be tortured. That is not who I am at all. I fisted in the vagina, and the sense of power that I would get doing that for these women and knowing they were having orgasms from what I was doing with my arm was lovely. I loved that. So there was a whole movement, of freedom, which now of course is gone. I mean, everything's closeted, or it's not the same. Then AIDS came into it, so people got really nervous about any kind of sex that wasn't like, missionary style kind of thing, heterosexual missionary style. But I felt as a female energy to be dominant and to be a role model. That's what I wanted. And realizing that being an out S&M dominatrix was a political statement. It was. There was no question about it, because it certainly wasn't something that was heralded and saying, oh, this is wonderful, all women should be dominant, And I never said that either. I never advocated that. I just advocated for taking your own power. And the thing about S&M, your play, it was always called play, by the way. Never work. It was always play. It was S&M play. The aftercare, that was always a big part of what we taught, because we taught classes at our club when it was educational. The reason we started doing these performances privately to our club was to teach people how to do it safely, and not to do any harm that you didn't want to do, an inadvertent harm. But the healing process called aftercare, you were tender with your partner. You hug them, you hold them. The psyche of the female is the healer, the maternal Jesus' mother, Mary holding the dying Jesus in her arms. I think I'm not religious and I don't believe in Jesus or anything like that, but I can see those archetypes. And that's why I never allowed myself to play with, they call it play, of course, in S&M, with male dominance. There was many, many male dominants who wanted to top me. Many of them. And I never let any of them near me, ever. I do not like heterosexual men tops. I hate them. I don't like dealing with them at all, because all of them wanted to dominate me. That would be the feather in their cap if they could dominate Sheree Rose, and they never could. Whatever your kink is, and we didn't care, why were you this way? Why did you like to be spanked? We didn't really care. It wasn't important. What was important was doing something safe, sane, and consensual. Those were the watchwords. And anything went. I think Bob was my teacher in many ways. I learned from him compassion, humor. Whatever life throws your way, you accept it. You don't fight it. You just learn from it. So I think I did learn a lot from. I think Bob was my teacher in that sense. And he would say that I want a mommy, even a mean mommy, especially a mean mommy. I had 2 pierces. One was put in the head of his dick, and the other was behind the scrotum. And then I could put them together and lock him up. And that was a very big part of our sexuality, me controlling him. So even if we weren't together or whatever was happening, if I wasn't there, he was locked up and I had the key. And I used to go to women's sexuality classes out in Orange County. I had a friend who was a human sexuality teacher, and I would preach to the girls there, have your men's penises locked up. You have the key. That way you're not going to have any diseases. You're not going to get anybody else pregnant. You're only going to have sex when you want it. I was like a proselytizer for that. It didn't work. When I met him, he was living over a garage in Long Beach. And nobody knew who he was. He was 27 years old, young. And I thought, I don't want him to die without people knowing who he is. They need to know who he is. And I accomplished that, He wasn't my child. I didn't bore him. But in many ways, I did. I facilitated. I lived out his fantasies for him and encouraged him in his best creativity, which was about me, a lot of it. So, why not? He understood something about life that most people don't understand, the finality of life, that you're only going to be here for a short amount of time. Even if you live to 82, it's still not forever, it comes to an end. And I think people who are sick like that, who have genetic illnesses, not something, if you catch something, that's a whole different story, but if you're born with something that you have no control over, you have to come to terms with that. And I think Bob more than came to terms with it. He embraced who he was. He beat the odds. And he often says it was because of me that he stayed alive. Because it would have upset me too much if he would have died when he went, the first time he went to the hospital. And I said, oh my God, Bob will never get to go to the Himalayas. That was what I was thinking, not, oh, he's going to die. But no, I was like, no, we're never going to go to the Himalayas. But I did go after he died. I went to the Himalayas. And I brought some of his ashes and some of his things, and I put them all in the Ganges River, which is what people do, And I did that for Bob, and in honor of Bob, I did get to the Himalayas after he died. Jim Ward had a piercing store called The Gauntlet in West Hollywood. At that time, we're not talking about the early 90s, it was the only place in America that you could go and get any kind of piercing besides your ears pierced. There was no such thing. And Bob started working at The Gauntlet. And one of the things he started doing, I also started a club, a women-only club called Leather and Lace. And again, that didn't matter if you were top or bottom, submissive, whatever. As long as you identified female and into S&M, you were in the club. So many of those women would go to the Gauntlet, and Bob would pierce their clits, their labias. He was famous for that. Bob was really the only male slave that I had. And he had true devotion. He would literally, not only would he do anything for me, that's how he gained his pleasure. His pleasure was in pleasing me, With the women slaves, I don't think it was so much that. Maybe because I don't identify as a lesbian, and that may be part of it. I mean, I would consider myself bisexual, definitely, and I love women's bodies, especially in SM. Bob was so skinny, he had no ass on him at all. So I loved slaves that were voluptuous. I loved them. But I never got that level of devotion from any of my female slaves, and most of them were very short-lived. The best was my trans female slave, Wendy, who was, Bob and I both loved Wendy. You couldn't. She was 6 foot tall, gorgeous, and very submissive to me. Very submissive to me. She was an ex-Marine, and her big thing was teaching women only, how to shoot guns. And very, very unfortunately, she ended up killing herself, because she would tell me things like, the hormones aren't right. I don't feel like a woman. And I would think to myself, what does it mean to feel like a woman? I didn't really, I guess, understand, but it was so horrifying to her, especially after I dismissed her from being my slave. She went with some other women who were not very nice to her, and she ended up committing suicide by gunshot. She actually had two pistols, and on both sides of her head. I learned lessons that I would never have learned just having like a normal relationship with a normal person, Psychologically, even if you do all the physical change, even if you take all the hormones, maybe essentially your psyche or your soul is something that doesn't change, no matter what your gender is, I think mine has stayed the same. I'm good and bad. I like to be in charge. I like to do things my way. I don't like to acquiesce, although I have, and I did, and I know how to do it, if I have to. I do, I may not like doing it, but, but that's who I am as a person. I don't think gender has anything to do with who I am as a person. Do I feel like a female? Often, I don't know what that means, but I'm an assertive, and I like to be in charge and all that stuff. Does that make me a masculine or a man? Do I ever want to be a man? Absolutely not. Never even occurred to me. I like masculine women. I love them, of course. They were my fetish, to see these lovely women in leather. Oh my God! And I like men who are submissive. I love submissive men. We're creatures of our bodies. We're prone to the diseases that happen to us, aging, things that go on. This is part of the process of being human. Accepting your body. Believe me, I'm having a really hard time with not being able. I'm someone who went to Machu Picchu, and I went to the Himalayas, and I was trekking. I did a lot of physical. I was never like an athlete, but I did a lot of physical things, and never thought about not being able to do something. So for me, the transition is accepting that I'm 82 years old, and my body is not what it used to be. And in fact, I have not really had a relationship since Bob died. It was my relationship with him was so profound and so deep. I didn't think anything else would even come close to that. I did have relationships with women. I definitely explored my relationships with women after Bob, much more so than before, although I did before as well, but men did not interest me at that point. I felt that patriarchy is too strong, and I don't want to deal with that. And I didn't want another submissive. That was enough. Saying that, I liked being a pro-dom. I really did like it, because of economically, I could make $600 for an hour of beating somebody up, and giving him pleasure with his bruises and whatever, and I would get $600 or more for an hour's work. So for me, that part of it was very economic, because I felt women don't get paid enough. Women traditionally don't get paid enough. So this was one phase or one part of the world where I could control it and I could make money from it. I documented mostly Bob, and I have thousands of images of Bob that's in an archive right now at USC, one institute. I donated, after Bob died, we lived in a very big house, beautiful big house, in Silver Lake, but I didn't want to live there anymore. I was going through a very big depression, so I moved out of there and gave all of my work, my photographs and other whatever I had, to one institute. So everything is saved at one institute. And then Bob's archive, his poetry, his books, his journals, all that is at Ohio State University. I celebrate what I did with Bob. I'm proud of what I did with Bob and what I've done with Martin. And Martin has written extensively about it. And I'm really proud of that. Because that's the mother part of me. My children, Bob, my child, and psychologically, and Martin, my child, psychologically, to see them succeed makes me very happy. There's no clarity to what is the role of a woman in the society. I took it on as being the helper, being the one who facilitates it happening. And I wanted Bob to be the star, and with Martin is obviously the star. I may do all the things to him, and I'm there with him those 24 hours. We do performances. I'm not away from the scene at all. I'm definitely right there. But it still seems to me that the man sort of gets more notoriety, that's what I wanted with Bob. I wanted to make him famous because I thought he was going to die. With Martin's already famous. But there's a sweetness, and Martin is not a true submissive at all, but he submits to me in our performances. I loved oral sex. Interestingly enough, I never had oral sex with Bob. I didn't. He never asked for it, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't like it. So I think I have a very mixed emotions about the penis, And why do I hang out with Eric for all these years? Because he never gets hard. I never have to see it erect. It's always flaccid, and I get to tie it up and torture it, and that's what I like.